Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordian Glory video, and before we get into today's episode I would like to say a huge thank you to Alex Smith for sending in some awesome pictures of his completed Valhalla Ice Warriors. I've actually met Alex in real life. He was a subscriber, a supporter channel. He messaged me on Facebook, said, I know you're going to be down at one of the Warhammer tournaments, do you mind if I come and say hi? He came and said hi, we had a couple of beers. It was awesome, and now we've actually met up a few more times. We've had plenty of games of 40k. We've played video games together. He's actually gone from just being a guy on the internet to what I would consider a firm and close friend. So it's really awesome that my channel has allowed me to, meet people from the community and just become great friends with them. So thanks, mate, for sending these pictures in. I love your Valhalla Ice Warriors. If anyone's wondering, the bits for the heads are the Ushanka hats from Anvil Industries. Really, really cool. And I think there's some Molotov cocktail bits which are from the Warlord games, Soviet troops. It's really a cool army. I've had the pleasure of facing it in combat with my Black Templars. So thanks, mate, for sending these in. Absolutely fantastic. Great to see the project finally finished. Got those last 30 guardsmen done. If anyone else has got any pictures they want me to use in my videos, please post them on my Facebook page. There will be a link down in the description below. Now, let's get into today's video. I am going to be talking about the good, the bad and the ugly of the new table sizes announced by Games Workshop. Now, this was announced on Friday and it was a pretty divisive topic in the community. I resisted the urge to do a video immediately on it, and I've taken the time over the weekend to sort of process the information, let my emotions come down a bit, and then do a much more sort of informed and measured response to the announcement. So in case you have been living under a rock, Games Workshop has put in some minimum size restrictions on table size and detachment sizes for Warhammer 40k 9th edition. Now, the detachment sizes isn't really a big one. Basically, if you're playing Combat Patrol, which is a small point, 500 point game, you're only allowed to take one detachment, and Incursion, which is sort of the medium size 1,000, 1,500 point games, there you're only allowed to take a maximum of two detachments now. And Strikeforce, which is a 2,000 point game, you're only allowed to take 3 detachments now. Now, what is interesting about this, and this is not the main point of the video, what's interesting about these detachment restrictions is before they were guidelines. It was, we recommend you don't take more than 3 detachments. Now what we see here is hard enforced rules in the 40k game. Now, of course, you can house rule, you can play 40k however you want. If you want to take 4 detachments in a Combat Patrol, you go, girl. But Games Workshop said if you're playing our game rules as written, now you actually have limits on the number of detachments you can take, which is very different to what they were doing with 8th. 8th was very much a case of, this is what we recommend and this is how the game it sort of should be played, but you can do what you want. And now it's, that is verboten. You must only take 1 detachment at Combat Patrol, and you can have no more than 3 at 2,000 point games. Fair enough. I think, to be honest, most people were sticking to the 3 detachments anyway, but I think it was possible for some factions like Imperial Guard to take 2 detachments with no problems whatsoever in like a 500 point game and have plenty of room left over for points for fun things like tanks and stuff. So I do get it, but they've just put the rules in there now. The big one, however, is the way that they have said they want you to create the battlefield and the size of the battlefield that you're now sort of meant to play on. Now, what they've done is they've essentially made the battlefields smaller. So when you're playing a small to medium sized game, Combat Patrol or Incursion, the minimum battlefield size they now recommend is 44 inches by 30 inches, which is a bit of a weird size when you think about it. But it's just under 4 foot wide, so it's 4 inches less wide, and 30 inches is only sort of 2.5 feet long. So it's actually quite a narrow battlefield that for a 500 point game, or a 1,000 point game. Then they've got Strikeforce, which is a 2,000 point game where they say 44 inches wide by 60 inches. So that's quite interesting, because what they've done there is they've kept the 44, so you're doing it on the same sort of depth of battlefield, but the 60 inches is a full foot less than what we're currently playing on. That is essentially, guys, roughly, the game's gone from a 4 foot by 6 foot game, or 6 by 4, however you want to look at it, to a to a 3.5 foot by 5 foot game. So it's quite a significant amount of inch which have been taken off the side. Now, there is an argument which I know some people are going to be putting down in the comments right now. This is the minimum battlefield size, and Games Workshop themselves have said you're more than welcome to keep playing on your 6x4 board. Totally get that, totally respect that argument. However, for competitive play, and for casual play, I will say most people will probably continue to play on the 6x4, because that's what a lot of people have on the battle mats they already own. However, for competitive play, which now is heavily leaking into just regular play, a lot of people look at the ITC to see how they just play their games at home. They're not keeping an eye on the meta necessarily, but they do just sort of keep one eye occasionally on how ITC and how the competitive meta is going and competitive ways of playing their games, because inevitably that will inform balance and points change, and that will affect your casual games as well. So despite the fact people say, narrative and competitive are separate, I would say now competitive play has quite a significant impact on narrative play. So, bearing that in mind, and I'm not saying whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but bearing that in mind, many tournament organisers have come out straight away, almost synchronised with this announcement of the smaller table sizes, and said that they will be following that. They will be using the minimum sizes for their events. So, for example, Frontline Gaming, which can be argued to be the leader of competitive play. ITC is extremely popular. It's overtaken ETC after many years of being seen as not, especially in Europe, as ITC was never really seen as a big deal. Finally, ITC sort of came in, swept away ETC over 8th edition. They have said they're using the minimum board size. Now, what that will mean is that if you want to practice for an ITC event, then you will need to get used to playing on these small table sizes. And a lot of people do follow ITC. A huge amount of the community do. And likewise, Games Workshop themselves have said for all their Warhammer World events, they will be following the minimum sizes as well. So what you have here is the leader in competitive events, who run the LVO, the biggest Warhammer tournament in the world, saying we're going to the minimum sizes. So they're leading the way on that side. And then Games Workshop, who runs, and I've been to half a dozen of the Games Workshop events now. They're really fun. Games Workshop, who lead the way in sort of events, but not cutthroat competitive, just nice, fun events. The narrative side of things, you could say. The narrative event side of things. They have said, we're going to follow the minimum. So that is kind of both bases covered when it comes to leaders in how you should be, representatives for how you should be playing your battlefields. So, naturally, whilst you are totally within your rights to play within 6x4, I think we're going to see the community fairly quickly, unless it's a total dumpster fire, move towards playing on the smaller table sizes. So, that's interesting. I think when this was first announced, a lot of people were saying you can just stick to your 6x4. And now that multiple, I've only used 2 examples. There are many people who have said straight away we're switching to the smaller table sizes. So now that that's been backed up by community leaders and Games Workshop itself, I think we're going to see that switch to the smaller table size. So that's the article and the effects of the proposed change. Well, the not even proposed, the change in 9th edition. Let's take a look at the good parts of this change. So, reducing. There's a couple of ways of looking at this. You can look at it from a real life perspective, and you can look at it from a gameplay perspective. So from a real life perspective, this is really good for tournament organisers and really good for sort of tournaments in general, because it allows them to have more tables at an event. If you're shaving a foot off every single table, that will very quickly stack up into you being able to get more tables at your event, more people playing against each other. That means you can have bigger events, more people getting involved in the community, more people being able to play those competitive games that many of us love. So that's great. It's probably quite good for the tournament community. It's good for the tournament organisers themselves. If they're able to get more people in, they're able to make more money. It's able to, that means that they can in the future host bigger and better events. That's really, logistically speaking for them, I think it's a big win. For Games Workshop themselves, it's a big win because they actually sell battle mats in this size. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but Games Workshop, part of Combat Patrol, not Combat Patrol, Kill Team, sorry, part of Kill Team, they sell battle mats which are 44 by 30 inches. That's what fits in the box. 22 by 30 inches Killzone boards. So what this allows Games Workshop to do is to kind of get their foot in the door with the battle mat industry, because not many people were buying the Games Workshop battle mats. You would get them for your kill team games and for your smaller games, and but most people were looking at the 6x4 because that was sort of not only the 40k standard, but the standard for many tabletop war games. I think Star Wars Legion's a bit unusual and it's 6x3, but bolt action, loads of Ninth Age, loads of different games. I'm only pulling a couple out the hat. It's just very common to play on a 6x4 board. It's been the standard for decades. I can't really think of a game I've played which doesn't use a 6x4 board for tabletop wargaming. So what Games Workshop has done is said, well, we're going to ask the community to play on the minimum board size which fits to the dimensions of the boards that we make, because you can get a couple of these kill team boards, put them together, and you're on your minimum board size now. So it's good for them real world because it means that they'll have more of an uptake on those kill team boards, which I imagine previously were not picked up as much as Games Workshop would have liked. Also, for Games Workshop, is it allows people to come in and have the complete experience within their stores. So previously, Games Workshop has been moving towards this bit by bit, and by selling custom dies with cool symbols on. Previously you could go to Games Workshop, you'd buy your models, buy your paint, buy your glue, great, build your models together, but then you had to go, if you wanted to have a proper battle, on a proper table, you could use your dining room table, but it wasn't the right size. It wasn't the 6x4. So you'd have to go out and, like I did, I got a couple of sheets of plywood and I hinged them together so that it's foldable, and I use that for mine. I roll a battle mat out across it. Now, with this move, from a commercial standpoint, it allows Games Workshop to say, look, this board size is now small enough to fit on this. Well, they're calling it the average size of dining table in the UK. There's a lot of different sizes of dining table in the UK, but basically it's small, and 6x4 was always slightly too big for a dining table. I will acknowledge that. I've never really played on a dining table that was you could have a proper game of 40k, and you always had to make it smaller or get your plywood out and get your mats out and play, make the table a bit bigger with a bit of wood. So now you can go in, you can buy everything. You can buy your battle mats, you can buy your terrain, you can buy your paint, you can buy your models, you can buy your dies, your tape measures, and you can just get everything from one place. And there is now, I can't think of one off the top of my head. They're even selling airbrush stuff. I don't know if they're selling an airbrush themselves, but from a noob's just getting into Warhammer 40k perspective, You can go into Games Workshop and you can buy everything you need from one place. You no longer have to go out and buy other stuff. Games Workshop did sell the Realms of Battle boards, which are the big plastic things that you push together, but they were 6x4, so someone would have had to go out and get the plywood and make the table extender. So now you don't need to do that. So for Games Workshop, it's a really, really good move. So that's the real life perspective. Now let's take a look at what it's good for in gameplay. Well, this is going to be really good for certain armies. A lot of the fast assault kind of armies are really going to enjoy this size of board. Now, I know some people will say, but Mordian Glory, the distance between the armies is staying the same. So you still have that 24-inch no man's land. Totally correct. Absolutely. From a sort of one-dimensional perspective, you're right. The armies are the same minimum distance apart. But what you've got to remember is you've taken 6 inches off either side. So your deployment zone is now potentially 6 inches less deep. So that means you have, you have less room to deploy what is called sort of a layered defense or defense in depth. To give an example, you've often seen me in my battle reports deploy what I call the 3-line deployment, where you have your rank of guardsmen, a gap, another rank of guardsmen, your gap, and then your tanks and stuff behind. Very standard. You're now going to really not be able to do that anywhere near as easily, especially if you're playing, because you've got 6 inches taken off your deployment zone. So that's kind of crazy when you think about it. So whilst the armies will start 24 inches apart, if you're facing off against someone who can very easily move 24 inches across the board and get a charge off, you can't pull your defense back. You can't deploy further back to counter that. For example, Gene Stealers, classic assault unit of 8th edition. They can move and they can advance. So typically, and you can take them as Kraken, so that they can move and roll 3d6 and pick the highest for the advance. So they move 8 inches, and let's say they get, they're unlucky and they only get a 4-inch on the advance. So they move 12 inches. You can then use the Swarm Lord to do that again. So they move another 8 inches and they get to advance again, which means they move another 12 inches. Those Gene Stealers, in one turn, have covered the entire of No Man's Land. Now, previously, you could take that into account and you could really pull your defense back, or you could have a screen up front and then a big gap between the next layer. So you'd be like, look, I'm going to sacrifice these 20 dudes to these Gene Stealers, but that works for me. Now you're going to struggle to do that because you've got 6 inches less deployment. I mean, you're going from having, you've got way less depth to your deployment zone. So that means that those Gene Stealers are going to move up, they're going to cover the whole of No Man's Land, and they're going to get that turn 1 charge off. And you can take Gene Stealers and blobs at 20, and they are considered one of the best assault choices in the entire 40k, and they have been so long before 8th edition. They've always been a solid choice, Gene Stealers. And 8th edition really brought them to the forefront. They're really, really good. So that's just one example of an army that's going to absolutely love it. Another example you could look at, there are lots of factions out there which now have a pre-game move. So you've got Blood Angels with Forlorn Fury. Put that on a big unit of 15 Death Company. And you are going to move forward 12 inches pre-game, then move forward another 12 inches with jump packs in the first turn. And you are going to be turn 1 charging someone. I think I am correct in understanding that there's no more Seize the Initiative in 9th edition, although I could be wrong. But if there is no, in ITC there is no Seize the Initiative. So what this means is that if someone knows they're going first, they can deploy in such a way which will definitely allow them to get that first turn charge. And previously you could counter deploy that by deploying way further back and in the corners of the board so that the enemy couldn't get you. But now your deployment zone is that much smaller, that becomes much harder to achieve with certain armies. So it's definitely going to favour assault armies. It's also going to really favour those armies which have got fantastic medium range firepower. So those armies where sort of the 24-inch bracket, the 30-inch bracket of firepower is where they shine best. So we're looking at Space Marines, specifically Primaris Marines are really going to love this change because they have the 30-inch bolter, which can just happily now sit on the edge of the deployment zone and blast 24 inches across the board, 6 inches into the enemy's deployment zone, and your opponent has 6 inches less for his deployment. So he has to deploy stuff very close to your Primaris Marines. So you could potentially be bolter drilling with your Primaris intercessors from the beginning. So again, really big win for Marines on this table size. Another unit, another army which is going to quite like this, I think, is Imperial Knights. And despite the fact what a lot of people believe, Imperial Knights actually do a huge amount of their damage in the combat phase. The shooting is what they do to sort of soften up targets, but it's when they start just stomping on everything with their titanic feet, which is when they start doing a lot of damage and tying units up and just doing crazy things. So it's really going to be good for them. You know, they're going to be able to cover that board nice and quickly. You won't be able to stop them, and they're going to be getting in amongst you. So from that's sort of the good. You know, I'm sure I haven't covered everything, but that is briefly what is sort of good about the change to the board size. Now, I think it's important that we take a look at the other side of the coin. So like in the last video that I did, you know, I've kept it very balanced at the beginning, but now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my objective hat off, and I'm just going to speak, I'm going to speak just honestly for a second, you know, be a bit more emotional, just tell you how I feel about this change. And I have to say that I think I have some concerns about it. I definitely feel like I've got some concerns about it. I personally believe that the changes in board size were not made from a balance perspective, but were made from a commercial perspective. I think Games Workshop really want to muscle into the map industry, and I think it's good for the tournament organisers, like I said, because they can make more money off it. And so I really hope I'm wrong, but if I was to be extremely cynical about this, I think this was potentially a commercial change, not a made for commercial reasons, and not a change that was made for balance reasons. Could be totally wrong. We haven't got the full picture of 90 yet, but that is a real world concern that I have. From a gameplay perspective, this again is a change, like the command point change, which will certainly favour some armies over others. And I think this could be a real tricky problem for horde armies and shooting armies, because long range shooting armies, because you are not going to be able to screen as effectively, because you won't be able to layer your defences potentially with the appropriate amount of inches in between. So the opponent might be able to charge in, massacre a bunch of units, and then just consolidate into the next line, and you haven't had the room to physically stop them. I think elite armies will be able to handle this change much better, because your force concentration, the amount of footprint you have on the board is much smaller. So if you are going second against one of these assault armies, you can really pull everything back, cram it into the corners, no problem. But if you are a horde army and you physically, you could cram everyone as far back as possible, and it's not going to stop the enemy from getting you. And now you don't, and you're going second, and you don't have the inches to stop people from just consolidating through your lines. It's going to be very tricky. I mean, there are multiple armies out there which have the ability to consolidate 6 inches just flat. There's multiple sub-factions, regiment traits or whatever, or chap tactics, which do something very similar. So it's going to be really difficult to screen. I think this again favours elite armies, and I think horde armies are really going to struggle. I think the one positive you could say is that horde armies have sometimes struggled with force concentration in the past, and now we will be that little bit more concentrated. That's true. But I think with an army like Guard, I think what's going to happen is we're just going to get smashed turn 1. And the armies that can pull off a turn 1 charge are going to be the ones that favour, that are going to shape the meta. I think that's what's going to happen. I have heard rumours, I don't know if it's truth that Overwatch isn't going to be a thing anymore. So that's going to be really bad. Makes Mordians pretty much invalidated, which upsets me greatly. Again, I don't know if that's 100% true, so don't quote me on that. Like the season thing, it's what I've heard on the grapevine. I don't want to spread rumours. So, as I've said, I think it's not going to be a great one for horde armies. I don't think it's going to be a great one for shooting armies. And I think it actually is going to remove quite a lot of the tactical depth of the game. It's been pointed out by many people that the movement phase can win or lose a game. And that is true. That is true. If you don't, it's a mistake that a lot of newer players make, and it's why, even though a lot of people say, oh, which one do you pick, Cadian or Catachan? Catachan is the one that turns up at tournaments more often, because Cadian forces you to want to sit still, and in competitive and winning games, movement is often key. You always want to be on the move in some capacity or another. So now, you know, we're going to have quite a restricted board size. And there are some people say, oh, it's not that much. I think overall, it turns out that the amount of table size which has been removed is 25%. It's 20 to 25%. That is significant when you think about it. Like that 6 inches on one side, 6 inches on the other doesn't seem like a big deal. But then when you take into account it's 3 inches on one side, 3 inches on another side, in total you're losing about 25% of the 20-25% of the board. So that's a lot. That's a lot of board size. That's just gone. So it's going to really restrict movement. And I've spoken about in the past with like mechanized guard. You know, you want to have those lone wolf squads. You know, a chimera with a squad in with a junior officer that just goes down the flank, just sneaks itself down the flank. That tactic's probably going to become way less viable now, simply because everyone's just crammed together. Also, it's really going to be interesting how the small board size is going to affect reserves. I mean, currently you can't come in 9 inches away from your opponent. So if everyone's crammed together and monster mashing in the centre, deep striking is going to be really tricky to pull off effectively, especially, you know, aggressive deep striking against your opponent. And they have also talked about reserves outflanking or whatnot. Well, if these reserves have to stay 9 inches away, is that really going to be a thing? And if reserves don't have to stay 9 inches away anymore, and instead you're able to deep strike where you want, isn't this again just going to massively favour assault armies? I mean, I don't know the answer to that question, but if it's suddenly extremely easy to screen out your opponent's assault units, then that's going to make deep striking assaults way less favourable. But then if they count that by saying, oh, you can deep strike where you want, then that's going to make the assault units way too valuable. So it's difficult. I think this is going to really it's going to really favour those armies which can assault very quickly, those armies which are small enough to be able to hide from that assault, and anyone in between is really going to struggle. And I honestly just don't know how I feel about it. And if I could just go one step further, I just want to know, I don't really know where this change is coming from. You know, no one was complaining about 6x4. It was on no one's radar. If anything, people were saying the table sizes were too small, and that 40k felt very cramped, and the amount of models you could get on the board was already too high. So yes, I know they are increasing points, but they're reducing the table size by a lot. It's going to balance out at the very least. So you've not fixed the thing which some people had a problem with, which was the table size being too small. And then you've actually, you know, and then a lot of, you know, people are saying, well, what about the points increases? Well, at the beginning of 8th edition, all the points went up, all of them, and it was, you know, like a 2,500 point Necron army at the beginning of 8th was only about 1,800 points by the end of 8th. You know, there were a lot of points decreases because people love points decreases. It makes them feel good. So yes, 9th edition might start off with these very high points, but inevitably they are going to come down bit by bit. That's what Games Workshop likes to do. And so I think what could happen is that we're going to end up with a smaller table size, which ends up having the same amount of models that we currently have. And it's just going to be crazy. It's going to be so crammed. And it's not going to be a war game anymore. It's just going to be a brawl. A big brawl in the centre of the board is what the game's going to devolve into. And instead of it being, and now 40k was never a super tactical game or super realistic. I mean, I'm not even bringing in sort of the realism of the size of the battlefield. I'm not even bringing any of that in. What I feel the games are changing from is from semi-realistic battlefields like you would see in like a documentary, for example, to almost like an action film style battle. Like when you see just two sides just running into each other from like a bird's eye point of view. You know, we've all seen that on sort of action films. I guess like a good example would almost be like the Battle of Winterfell, where there's a huge field of battle they could be battling on, but everyone just charges at each other, just sort of straight down the middle. It's just I just don't know how I feel about that. I quite like doing grand maneuvers. A lot of people in 40k say they want to switch to an I go you go movement system for turns. I personally quite like the not the I go you go, the alternate activation. Sorry, I quite like the I go you go because it allows me to pull off this feeling of grand maneuvers like full flank attacks and full. It feels a bit more like a grand strategy game rather than a skirmish game. It's one of the things that turned me off bolt action for a long time was the semi alternating activations. So that we won't be able to pull off those grand battles anymore because it'll just be mash everything into the centre. Because you can't deep strike within range of objectives. Some armies are just going to really struggle with this. I mean, pure Genestealer cult is looking in a really bad way. You can't, you're going to be punished for taking your Genestealer allies or your guard allies. Your gimmick of being able to ambush the crap out of people, that's not going to happen because you're going to be screened out. You won't be able to go near objectives. Everyone will be able to come in from the side of the board, so your gimmick doesn't really mean anything. You can try and banzai across the board, but your guys only move 6 inches. It's a real funny one. You're going to be paying through the nose for your cult ambush, but then you're not going to be getting any benefit from it because you won't be cult ambushing that much. Yeah, the blips are kind of okay, but it just feels like some armies are going to be really heavily punished. Some armies are going to love it. I think orcs could. For the table size, orcs are going to hate the CP thing. But for the table size, it's good for them. You can just smash your green tide up the middle of the board. I think potentially it could be good for them. Could be wrong, but I just think there's some armies which are really going to struggle. Really, really going to struggle. So overall, how do I feel about the changes? Me personally, very mixed feelings. I don't feel like it was a necessary change. Again, I feel it favours certain armies. Again, I feel like it punishes hordes. And I just feel instinctively like the change was made almost entirely based on commercial reasons than balance reasons. Based on the information we have now. This video could be out of date. They might release an article on Monday that explains it all. We'll see. But that's how I feel about it personally. Like with the last video, I'd really appreciate it if everyone could put their comments down below about how they feel about it. What do you think? How do you feel? Do you think that the changes in board size is good for game balance or bad? Do you think it was a necessary change or kind of a change for the sake of change and it benefits people commercially in a negative way, like it's commercial over balance? Do you honestly think it's good for the game? Like no reasons why. You just feel that it's just positive for the game. If you believe that, I honestly respect that. Put it down in the comment section below. This is not a salt video. As with the last one, I've tried to be really careful not to come across as salty and bitchy. I've tried to be sort of balanced at the beginning and then just as a long beard how I feel about it. Hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Please, loads of comments if you can. Thank you, and I'll see you guys next time.